Good morning and welcome to the shop here in beautiful Canterbury, New Hampshire. It's nice to connect with your groups and you all individually. As I understand it, you're not in a group today, so everybody's by themselves, but sensing the group energy. So I just want to offer a quick word of thanks to Joel and Jean, Joel for setting this up, and Jean for handling the technical side of things. And of course, the camera lady is always got her position there behind the camera. But
thank you.
I'm looking forward to this morning to share with you guys one of the most fundamental key woodworking joints in woodworking, and that is the mortise and tenon, and some variations of that, applications and techniques for cutting a few, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. I know we've got the Howard County Woodworking Guild, is that right?
Yes, Annapolis Woodworking Guild, Fredericksburg area Woodworkers Guild, oh goodness, and the Washington Woodworkers Guild. I think I've named those all correctly.
Wow. Well, congratulations. This is the first multi-group guild meeting we've had, I think, live streaming. Usually we do these singularly with a group, so we're really grateful that you set that up and that we can connect with all of you. Some of you may not know who I am. My name's Tom McLaughlin, and I have been woodworking for between 30 and 35 years, like professionally making custom furniture for most of that, and in the last few years have just dedicated myself toward passing on the craft. And I love it. I'm having a lot of fun with it, and we love just kind of opening the shop doors virtually to you to come in and to enjoy the craft together. So if you want to access us, we're over at epicwoodworking.com. You can learn all about what we got going on. We've got a live stream YouTube that goes every Thursday night, and there's lots of courses and plans and things that you'll see over there. But is that enough?
Yes, it's on the page that got you here, as well as in the description below. Just a quick intro to say, if you click the show more below the watch screen that you're looking at right now, there's lots of information about us, and then there's also some links to things that Tom's going to refer to in this experience here. Some bonus content of videos that we've done in that Shop Night Live experience that he thinks will be appropriate follow-ups. Free content for you to look at to give you even more meaty look at some of the things he's going to say today. So feel free to peruse that, as well as at the bottom of the page on that link page that you came from. There's some things about us. We have a membership program and things like that. So enough about us.
Well, enough of that stuff. Let's get to the work at hand, and I want to just begin with some fundamental explanations of terms and things. I know we're all at different places in our woodworking journey or life or whatever, and we, in talking with Joel, we decided on the mortise and tenon joint and variations and how and when and where to apply it. So this is my example of a mortise and tenon joint. Just to get the terminology down, we've got a simple tenon going into a mortise. The mortise is the slot cut into the material, and then the tenon is an extension of a rail typically that joins in most often at a 90-degree angle into the leg. So just understanding quickly, it's really an effective way for connecting material like wood together, because with wood you've got this fibrous texture to it, and it's always running, these fibers are running along the grain here and then along the grain here, and in order to connect them together, if we went just like a flat butt joint, And usually you need then a mechanical nail or screw to hold that together. And of course that's not super strong. So to interlock these in such a way that they're strong and stay together was one of the earliest ways of joining wood. So to basically make a hole and then extend a tenon into the hole. And then prior to modern glues, these joints were always pegged, and they would drive a peg through the side and slightly offset the hole on the tenon in such a way that when the peg was driven, it would cinch the shoulder of the tenon up tightly and hold it in place. Now, mostly pegs are used in a decorative way, unless on like timber frame construction. But where you're gluing up the joint, they are decorative. But where you're not, they're functional. But the vast majority of the time in furniture making, we're gluing the joint up these days. So we won't be using pegs to clamp them together. We'll use a typical clamp. So,
Hey, Tom, we are, sorry to interrupt you, we're having a little segment of people that are having challenges getting onto this page. So they've asked us to pause for a minute.
okay.
So maybe if we can, let's see, what do we talk about?
Well, I've got a few new dance moves.
You think he's kidding? Yeah.
Not moves I've practiced, so you don't want to see them.
Maybe we can share about the epic weekend. I don't know. Is that something people would care to hear about? Since
It's okay.
we're holding space here.
Well, if people want to join us, we have some epic weekends planned for September and October, and you can check that out on the website.
He says they're in now.
You're good. Okay,
Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you, Joel.
All right. So, not to go all the way back, but just for those who just joined us, welcome. And I was just getting started talking about the mortise and tenon joint, how fundamental it is to woodworking, to joining pieces together at right angles. Typically, a rail into a leg of some sort. You have the tenon extended here on the rail, and the mortise is into the leg component. So just for terminology, when we talk about cutting them, we'll reference the cheek of the tenon and the shoulder. So the cheek is this side wall of the tenon itself. The shoulder is this hard edge that bumps up against the leg when it's inserted. So you don't see the cheek, but that's critical. That's where we get a lot of nice glue surface against the side of the mortise, and it goes in and hits. Now, just a quick way to remember that term, if you just think of this like a stick figure man, you've got, and this is his head here, and his shoulders, and then the cheeks of the tenon coming up the side. So that's pretty much it on the terminology for that joint. All right, so this is the primary joint, and we'll demonstrate a fundamental way and a cool little jig you can make yourself to knock these out pretty readily, and hopefully that'll help if you've not made mortise and tenon joints before. So that's what we see mostly, but not to be confused with the floating tenon, which have become really popularized by some new machines like called the Domino from Festool, where instead of just cutting a dowel, like just drilling a hole for a dowel, you can now cut a slot with a tool that will make a nice little mortise, a true mortise that these tenons can be fitted into. So this is you can also cut the mortises traditionally and make your own tenons that would fit in and into one end, and then they would also fit in to the other end like this. So you're gluing this tenon into both ends. So the tenon is no longer integral to the actual rail. This is a true tenon. That tenon is an extension of the rail. It's integrated. It's the real deal, right? These are floating tenons where the nice thing about when you're building using these type of tenons, you just cut it straight. Just cut whatever that shoulder joint is up to that rail, and then you just have to cut your the two compatible mortises, or however many, and then you just glue it into both sides. Now these are quite strong. Let's see if we can put that right on there. It fits great, and it's strong, but it's not quite the true strength of a regular mortise and tenon. But, you know, for, say, a little table, like a base like this would be for, it's more than strong enough, you know. And so you might at the end of this morning say, the heck with those tenons. I'm getting myself a floating tenon cutter. But anyway, I just wanted you to see that. We're going to be talking about true tenons today, not that cheating method. Actually, I love the really where these come in so handy is with complex angular joinery, joining curved parts to straight parts. But we won't be really addressing this so much today. But we want to stick to the true tenon with some variations. All right?
Hey, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Is there any species of wood or type that should not be used for mortise and tenon? Is that ever a consideration?
Not really. I think any species can be used. The only thing that comes to mind is that some woods have a fairly high oil content. So like teak, or what did we just use? Cypress, not so much, but one of the primary ones we think of is teak. It just has a natural oil in there. And so in gluing up the joint, you know, you'd have to just make sure that usually you just pre-treat the joint with acetone or something to get the surface glue off and glue it up, and you're good to go. But structurally, all wood is fibrous and linear like this. So the fundamental idea, wow, I just chipped that, is coming into play. So it really doesn't matter that much.
Get the surface oil off, you meant. Acetone, yeah.
What did I say?
You said surface glue, I think.
Oh, yeah, I meant to say.
Just wanted to specify that.
All right, so let's take a look at some of the most common applications for mortise and tenon joinery, and that is with tables and chairs. So all types of tables I'm talking about, but this is probably the most basic, simple style table. And then let me get rid of this top. This is not glued up. So this table is employing tenons just like I showed you there at the bench. So let me take this apart. I gotta be careful here that I don't crack it when taking it apart. Okay, so here's that common tenon and mortise. And you notice these tenons I made an inch long so that they collided actually with the same tenon coming at the 90-degree angle inside there. So the only modification at the end was that inside corner of the tenon had to be trimmed to like a 45-degree angle so that it didn't bump into the other. But that's the last thing you do. You know, you're making it as a straight square tenon to start with. So this is, by the way, this is probably the most beginner course if you're interested in building a table like this and experiencing mortise and tenons for the first time, this is a pretty good way of doing it. Just make a small table like this, whatever, and you'll get a good experience of fitting them, cutting them, and the concept behind mortise and tenon. Chair, on the other hand, this is a craftsman inspired chair that has a lot of mortise and tenons coming through, and you can see this is all white oak, and these were pegged after being glued up. Like I said, that's really more decorative, but they are functional. They're going in through the tenon and holding that joint, giving you that additional reinforcement. So here we have our seat rail and our stretcher down below, which is also tenoned in to the back leg. So having that stretcher just reinforces and strengthens that joint tremendously, so that my mother could never tell me to please sit down in your chair and don't rock back like that at the dining table. So this is not going to fail, and you'll be good to go. This chair also has, mortise and tenons across the back. Even this splat rail is tenoned into mortises at the bottom and the top, and the crest rail. So chairs are like the ultimate experience, I think, in mortise and tenon joinery, because not only are they full of mortise and tenons, but they often include some complexity to cutting them, where you've got angled mortise and tenon. So I want to show you how to cut an angled mortise and tenon as well this morning. All right, so let me set these out of the way.
Okay, while you're moving around, question. Jack's curious. I noticed on the table that the mortises don't come through the top of the legs. Is there a reason for this?
Oh, yeah, great question. Yes. So if you can imagine, if that mortise went all the way out through the top of the leg, you would have like a springiness to the joint, and it would be floppy. You'd have that tab of wood. So, and it would also be weaker and prone to break off here, because all the fibers in the leg are running vertically here. So we leave that up at the top to strengthen that joint up there, so that it creates a housed tenon that is held in there nicely. If you went all the way out, you'd really break down the structure of the socket of the mortise itself to hold there. So we always I stop minimally of a 1/2 inch. Typically I'm 5/8 from the top on a rail like this. So there. Let me bring up and show you a couple other tables that, let me set this over here. So this now is a little more advanced table here, where we've got the inclusion of a drawer. So on the sides, where we've got a nice mortise and tenon side and back, but then in the front, we've got this drawer opening and a drawer divider here, which is actually mortise and tenoned into the leg, but not in the same way. And I'm going to show you how. Let's set this aside on this demo table. This, by the way, is another, this is we call this shaker end table with a drawer. Probably the best course, I think, to get a good start in woodworking, because it includes all these fundamental joints and dovetailing and fitting a drawer, all that. It's pretty complex in that way. But this table, we won't get into this today, but this joins with a dovetail on the top divider here. I'm going to take this apart. And what I really want to show you, though, is the way this joint comes in. So can you see that? So now we have a mortise and tenon over here, but there's two, and they're side by side. We call this a twin tenon. Let me get this up here. I'm going to take the back off. So let's work with just one side here. So here's a twin tenon. We've got side-by-side mortises, and then the tenon coming in this way. Okay, the twin tenons fitting. Now, that's a little more challenging to fit because you've got to get the spacing correct, and in order to have it work this way. But you know, the real beauty of a twin tenon like this is the amount of strength you achieve with a narrow, thin piece of wood into the leg. You've got a lot of glue surface, and you've doubled the strength of the tenons themselves in order to rest in there. This is the perfect wood joint for a small, light divider like this to fit into a leg. Now, you may say, hey, let me get the piece of chalk here. Why don't you just cut the tenon horizontally? So why didn't we just make a mortise into the leg like this, say, instead of two side by side, and we could have had, you know, the tenon fitting in more in a horizontal manner like this, okay? Just put one across rather than two. Well, that would work for a while, but it's not as strong because when you put something in like that, first of all, you're cutting across the entire leg. Here's the strength of the grain coming up. You still have lots of leg on the other side, but you're cutting almost across the whole leg. And then you have end grain here in the leg coming up on both sides of that tenon. So you would have end grain and end grain across a wide tenon here. So when that's glued in, it's not going to be as long lasting because glued up joints last the longest when you have side grain to side grain. Even if they're perpendicular to each other, the side grain to side grain produces a much better bond with glue because the end grain is hollow in some way, and it wicks away the glue. And if you think of it as the end of, like, if you had a cluster of straws in your hand right here, that's the cellular kind of nature of wood. It's coming up into that side of the joint, and it would just not hold up as well over time. So you minimize your effective glue surface by putting one tenon there. Now, think of the contrast. With a thin divider like this one, now we've got all of that side grain here on both sides of that joint, and then and you've got a lot of it. You've got both tenons coming in, and when the joint is fitted, it just creates a double housed tenon with great glue surface. You've got 4 glue surfaces on these sides that are longer and stronger. And another nice feature of it is with a narrow piece like this, when you square across and you cut your mortises to a nice line, it has a self-squaring effect when this narrow piece is glued up and inserted, where it won't twist as much. You'd have a little more challenge with a long, wide tenon like that. So twin tenons are the joint of choice when joining something thinner and in this manner, where the normal rail is vertical and you have just a more natural, look how good I get that Is that chip bothering you?
I can't see it.
I have an urge to get some glue under there and like put a little clamp on there, but I'm going to resist that, and it would be invisible.
Somehow that doesn't surprise me, knowing you.
Anyway.
Joel is bringing up the modern writing desk for anybody that really wants a lot of twin tenon practice.
Yeah, Joel, thank you. I'm going to refer to that near the end this morning to show when we get to the fitting stage and another technique for fitting these.
He did that project with us.
So you did? All right. Wow, that's great. Because that is a classic example of twin tenons. But
you have your fill.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to set this. Oh, wait, I did want to talk about one more thing. You notice that this back rail, here we have a mortise and tenon joint for this rail going across the back. Let me get it this correct way. And we've got a break in the middle of the tenon here. Now, it'll be better to illustrate this with a longer version. Check this out. This is a little Queen Anne, base to a Queen Anne table, a little oval table that I've made numerous times, and I saw first at Pug Moore's down in North Carolina, down in your area. I forgot to mention how much I love that area of the country. But this one has also a broken kind of tenon. Now, some of you probably already guessed, why would you do that? Well, you want to leave a bridge of material here because you can imagine if you go out too long, if I didn't have that bridge in there, this would be a sloppy kind of springy joint here, and this would not have a strong kind of socket like to house the tenon. It just wouldn't have the same strength, and you'd have to put a clamp on there when you were gluing it up, but mechanically you wouldn't get the same kind of snug bite around the tenon. So when going, usually it's over 5 inches wide or so, I'll break the tenons up. This one, you might have been able to get away without breaking it up because it's 4-inch, but that's about as far as I want to go for the width of the tenon. But for this table, I like to break it up to show, just to go through the exercise. And also I know it is going to lend itself to a stronger, longer lasting mortise and tenon. So one thing to consider though here is this rail is getting almost to the extent where you wouldn't want to join a rail into a leg at a 90-degree angle. Because we've got, what are we, like 7 inches wide there or something? So we're, 6.5 inch rail into the leg, because this grain is expanding and contracting. Here's our grain. The wood always expands and contracts across the grain like an accordion, and here on the leg, it's vertical this way, and wood does barely at all moves in that length. So this leg is frozen and fixed, where this wants to expand and contract. So once you get over like 7 inches wide, say, or with wood, you start to get nervous if you glue it up along the whole length that you're going to find a crack developing later on. It really doesn't occur so much until you hit like 7, 8, 10 inch wide boards. And you see this a lot in the old 18th century furniture where the sides were typically glued up like this with 3 big tenons going in. And invariably, all these 18th century chests of drawers or highboys, the base of them would be cracked across the middle because you've frozen it this way. But the main reason I want to show you this is to see that leaving a little bridge of wood and it's just breaking up a long tenon to give you more strength into the leg. Okay.
Tom, are you going to cover the ratio of the length of the tenon to the joint?
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Good time for now.
In general, as a general rule, the tenons typically are are a third or so of the thickness of the rail. One of the main considerations you're thinking of, though, is making your mortises in such a way into the leg that you're not weakening the leg structure. So if I put a big half-inch thick tenon on here and stuck it right in the middle of that leg, and then did the same over here, I would have culled out a lot of material there. And then I'm weakening the strength of the top. So I might have a super strong tenon, but if you have to maintain a kind of balance between the strength in the leg, and this could easily break off. So you want to get a good size tenon, but not too big to weaken the leg. So here I've got, what is this, about 7/8 rail, and I've got a 5/16 thick tenon there. And for a small table like that, this is plenty big. You could even get away actually with a 1/4 inch thick tenon here, given the amount of strength. But with chairs, we would always go with 3/8 inch tenons into the legs, which tend to be larger, so they can handle a 3/8 inch mortise into the leg. And then you notice always, the rail is justified out toward the front here. I've got a slight reveal, like an offset on that front. So you're going to see your mortises are justified out toward that face. So this would be the face of the other rail coming in. And that way it allows you to make a longer tenon, and these are colliding, but you have a stronger center beam there still as well. So if usually you don't see your mortises in the middle of the leg. They're offset toward the surface, toward the face, like that. Okay? So there, we've got hope that answered that question. As far as general rules you're thinking about the strength of the tenon in combination with the strength of the leg. All right, so let me show you one last piece here, and this is a great example of a twin tenon. This is a Duncan Fife chair, a famous style that was popularized in the mid-1800s by Duncan Fife, and made in a lot in the New York area. But this is like a Greek revival style chair. You can see kind of that almost Greek, or you think of the Klymos chair, the Egyptian type style. But one of the features of this design is, rather than having this type of rail across the front, where you've got the seat rail is coming in like my demonstration piece with a nice tenon going into the leg and peg there, you've got this really narrow front seat rail. It was designed that way. And you think, how in the world are you going to make a good long-lasting tenon into that leg that's going to hold up for a few hundred years, which a lot of these chairs do. They hold up great. And what I discovered in reproducing one of these years ago was in examining an original. I got to work on a chair that was built in like 1800, and it was down in North Carolina, an old plantation house. And when I got to inspect it, I could see. Let me see if I knock this apart. It's really ingenious, but let's pull this apart. This is at an angle here. Look at those mortises on the leg. So you've got twin mortises and twin tenons into a narrow rail, and I'm telling you, that is an incredibly strong structure. And I built this one just like the original. It had a slow growth kind of hardwood behind it. I think we used ash, or you could use oak, but I think the piece that we copied had like a slow growth ash quarter sawn with the mahogany laminated to the front. So you get that nice appearance all around. But that is employing the twin tenon for the same reason as the table. It's a super effective joint when you have a thin stock going in to a leg. And so that's why why we employ that joint there. These, I'm saying, these are probably the most common uses of the mortise and tenon. So I wanted to really focus and highlight these today, and I'll refer to a couple others at the end, and we can use this as a basis. All right, I'm gonna get this out of the way. Okay, so let's make some mortise and tenons. Now, when I started out teaching courses on making a mortise and tenon, I actually had students chop one by hand. And that took the better part of half a day, more than that. And I was like, you know what? This is nice, but it was good because it gave everybody the experience, right, of chopping by hand. And really what it did in the end, it was like, it made you say to yourself, I'm never chopping another one of those by hand, right? And you got a full appreciation of what it takes to evacuate the mortise with a hand chisel. And this is actually one of the chisels that I bought for those early classes. It is a mortising chisel, 5/16 wide, and you would just chop out that entire slot. Since then, there are other methods you can use on a drill press. You can just drill out on multiple holes and then clean out with chisels a square socket. But by far, one of the most pound for pound valuable machines, if you're going to be doing any mortise and tenon, is a hollow chisel mortiser. And I'm going to show you that, but I'm going to be cutting these mortises on the hollow chisel mortiser. Otherwise, we wouldn't get to show much. So it's an incredibly cost-effective machine. It doesn't, I think you can get them used like benchtop models for $300, maybe even less, I don't know. Maybe some people can chat in on where they get them. But there are also, the floor models are more like $1,000, but still, you can do a lot with a benchtop model and super effective. Now there are other even more costly machines that work with a router bit and cut a beautiful slot. And I'm actually going to be doing a video soon on using the multi-router, and I've really enjoyed playing around with that toy, but that of course is a greater expense and you've got to justify. But if you were in a production setting, you'd absolutely want a mortiser that worked with a router-based approach. But we're going to show with the hollow chisel mortiser. And to demonstrate, I'm going to use some leg stock, like that would be true of that one of those small tables. And I've got this material, we'll say this will be our rail. And let's just designate a face here. That looks nice. And I will, I'm just choosing my best side. This is cherry. And of course you end up with these natural pitch pockets here and there. But I'm gonna just put a face mark here. Or sometimes you can just put a line. And this will be going into the leg here. So this will be my face. And I'm gonna just make a chalk mark to show that's the general location of my mortise. That way I can not get confused where I'm laying it out, okay? So the first thing I wanna lay out for that mortise is the length of the mortise. Where's the bottom of it? And this is a question that comes up a lot. Like, do you offset the bottom of the tenon of a rail like this? And the answer is typically no. Traditionally, with tables and chairs, the bottom of the rail is the bottom of the mortise. It gives you a good solid reference to rest on and assemble the piece. Now, in some cases, yeah, you can look underneath there and you can see a little line, even maybe a slight gap where that mortise is in there, but that never bothers me. I just think, you know, when you look under there, you think, wow, this is a true mortise and tenon chair. But these chairs, 200 plus years old, have held up really great. Plus, if you try to offset it, now you have kind of like this blind reference point to cut your leg into, your rail into the leg. So we're gonna mark right at the bottom of that. And to set that up, I'm gonna use just a little square, and let's put it on something here. So I'm gonna get this to mark the width of my rail. There's lots of ways to do this, but I'll show you this is very simple. So when I hit the wood there, I'm gonna tighten this up. And this now, if I hold that, I can feel I'm dead flush with the bottom of that. So that's perfectly the length or the width of my rail going in. So I can come over to my leg, and by referencing the square on the top of the leg, I can, here's my mortise. That's why I made the line. I can make a little line right under here with a fine pencil. I've got a 0.5 millimeter pencil. So when I make that line, if you really look at it, oh, did I make that? I'll make sure I tightened up my square. Sometimes I just want to say, oh, that's perfect. You'd never know the difference, would you? But it felt like it wasn't. Okay, so we just snug that up. I just want to make sure I didn't slip that. Yeah, it did slip a little. Okay, so we're just going to come across and make that line. Now, notice that that line is completely outside of the square. So when I cut the mortise, I want to leave the line. Okay, now if I wanted to be really exacting, I was in a situation where I wanted it to be super crisp, I could use a knife. I could come down here with a knife and make a score mark like that. Now I've got a little more accurate, so there's actually a spot where I'm catching this knife into a knife line. Let me make it over here just so you can see. I don't know if you can see that, but you're just gonna knife under the area where the tenon will be. But you can get quite accurate with just a pencil if you have a fine point, and when you cut the mortise, just leave the pencil line, and you'll have it exactly to the width of your rail, okay? So now we've got that. Then I would of course mark all my rails like that. Then I'm gonna set the step down, because I don't want to run my socket all the way out the end. I'm going to set it to 5/8 for this one. Go. And there you have it. That's going to be our mortise right there. All right, now let's also do a twin tenon while we're at it, because we can use the same setup. And one of the ways you can cut a twin tenon effectively and quickly is when the twin tenon stock, like this represents a divider, like for a table. Like let's say we were coming in here with a divider. That if the divider stock is the same thickness, identical as the leg stock, it makes it fairly easy to cut, because we're just going to reference off of the face. We'll spin the leg around in the mortiser and cut one side and then cut the other. And then we'll do the same when we're cutting our tenons to fit into that mortise, okay? So I'm gonna just come around, let's just come around to the other side. I'll put one coming in from the other corner, and we can make all these cuts. Now, this is a little more challenging to lay out. So I want the bottom of this to be about the same as the bottom of the rail, so I just reset it up. And now I want to mark the width. I'm going to have a tenon coming here and a tenon over here, right? So I want to mark the width of this squarely across the board. So I can hold it on there like so, and this, let me get a square here, and then bring a square up to it, and see, I'm just leaving the pencil line. Now, holding this in place, I can take a marking knife and score right across. So here I want, this is going to give me better result if I can score it with a knife. And now, before I move it, I'll just come to the other side. I'm just going to make a little tick mark here. Whoops, I did move it. This is why it's a little challenging. I'm going to put my knife back there to get exactly the right spot. I was trying to do it left-handed so you would see it, but here I'll just make a little, I could go all the way across here, or you can just make a little tick mark and then carry the knife mark across. Okay, so that gives us our knife mark for our twin tenon right there. All right, so we're going to be mortising where these pencil lines are, just as a reference. This is just for reference to the knife line there. Okay, so with those all set, we can head over to the mortiser and make our cuts.
Hey, Tom, before we walk that way, I had somebody notice that you have a rope bed railing or a bed railing, and I was curious if you're going to say anything about the bolted mortise.
Yeah, I am.
Okay,
yeah,
thought so.
At the end, I'm going to talk about some variations, and I can have, we're not going to be able to go in depth, but I do have some videos that are free and available that we're linking you to at the end if you get really curious about that.
Yeah, the links to those are in the description below already.
Yeah. So let's walk on over. Hopefully I got everything I need here to the mortiser. Okay, so here we are. We've got a setup here. I've already set this. I think we'll have time to show you the method for setting it up. But this is a floor model where it has this nice table that you can just turn the crank and move side to side. And basically what you do is you're holding your stock in there, and then you're adjusting the hollow chisel off of the fence. So I always put my face against the fence for reference, and then I set this offset. It's a little over 1/4 of an inch off the fence. So I'm going to make that mortise for that tenon right along that point, and I'll just go pencil line to pencil line. Then we'll go to cut the twin tenon, so we'll make one mortise along this side here, then we'll flip it around and come in from the other side and get the other one right there. Now when we go to cut that second mortise too, just to show you, I don't want to go quite to the same depth, so I'm going to use a little depth adjustment there. But let me just show you, if you've never seen a hollow chisel, here's what they look like. This is a 3/8 inch size, and basically you have a drill bit, which is just drilling a hole, but because it's inside a square hollow chisel, it leads the cut slightly by about almost 1/16 of an inch. So it's just drilling a hole, and then as you press down, the square chisel is shearing off the edges of that hole to form a square. And the shavings from that plunge of the square chisel get evacuated up through that slot out the side. Okay, so let's go ahead
And they can get a different kind of the non-floor model, right? Like a tabletop model?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. You can get bench top for years. That's what I had, and that was what my early classes were, a multi-co bench top model. And that was the one I was mentioning, around the $300 range. But you also can get the hollow chisel setups to go on a drill press. But because it's kind of a long carry, and because it's modifying a drill press, it does it well enough, but it's not nearly as good because you have a little more play in there, and you have the time of reconfiguring your drill press. So it's almost not worth it. I had one for a while, but then if you're going to be making chairs, tables, this is super value. So once I've got the distance set from my fence, which I set here, as I said, a little over 1/4 of an inch, I'll come down and hit the workpiece, and then, so I've done nothing yet. I've just touched the workpiece. Now I want to plunge to the desired depth. Now usually I'm making like 7/8 or an inch long tenons. Here for the demo, I'll just do a 7/8 long tenon. And so I want to cut a little over that. So let's say I went an inch. I just could measure back here. This is my depth stop back here. So by loosening this handle, that rod goes up and down, and I adjusted it to, let's see, a little less than an inch. So here's the inch. And so when I start boring into this, it's going to come down, and that will stop me at the desired depth. So remember what I said about the layout line. This is the bottom line. This is the important one. I want to just leave that line, and I'll get a quite accurate fit. So here we go. Just overlap a little bit with each one. Nice smooth cut. Just walk your way across. And then go to the top. I go to the top before I'm done cutting across so that chisel is fully supported all around. If not, it's going to want to deflect into the hollowed area. So get the ends while you still have material. Then you can come back and clean out next to it. Okay? So let's check that out. Isn't that nice? I mean, look how fast that was. If you cut one by hand, you'll appreciate that. All right, even more. Okay, so now I've got that. Now I'll demonstrate like cutting the twin tenon on the side here. And another feature of this is this clamping caul. So I bring it up and then I just lock it against the fence. So that holds it, and then I can just move the thing. With the table mounted, the one I had for years, your caul was your thumb. And you pushed it against the fence, and your thumb was also that dialing mechanism, because you would just slide it across with your thumb. So you got pretty good and appreciative of your thumb. But once you get this, if you go for one of these, it's really nice. All right, here we go. Now this time, I'm going to get my sight right along the edge and just try to touch that knife line. Oh, I forgot to mention something. I'm going to change the depth a touch. So instead of going the full inch deep, I've got a full 1/4 inch here. I'm going to set this right here. I could glue it on there. I mean, double stick tape it. But that'll restrict the depth of cut. So you see, it just stops me a little earlier, and I don't go quite as deep for these. Twin tenons do not have to be as long to be effective, and because of that amount of glue surface. So again, here we go. And I hit my stop, and then move. All right, let's check that out. There, we've cut our first twin tenon. I mean, mortise. Look, you can see where I blew through on that first one. I didn't really want to do that, but I forgot to set that depth. So I got one hole deeper than the others. All right, so let's clean this up. Let's go back to the bench for a second and clean this up, and then we'll cut the corresponding tenons. All right, so the hollow chisel mortiser that doesn't quite get all the way to the bottom of the hole. The drill bit itself is leading the cut a little. So I like to just go in and clean it up. Just takes a second here. If you come in with a chisel at the ends, I'm just cleaning that little bit that didn't quite bottom out. Let me see. Can you see in there? Mm-hmm. Okay, see how it's a little messy at the very bottom? So by chopping in, I can get that. I can also at this time, look, if I didn't hit the knife line, I can use my chisel into the knife line and just lean down on it like that with the chisel. So just lean right into the chisel, and you can clean it up really nicely. Okay, and then coming in from the side, I'm just touching the bottom of this mortise. I don't want to touch the side walls because those are already the right dimension. The hollow chisel that I was using was 5/16 square, so it's got a really nice dimension, and I don't want to mess that up because I'm going to cut the tenons here in a second. Same thing, just getting to the bottom of this one. Turn around. Okay, that's good. Now we just get that out of there. All right, much cleaner. Looks great. Okay, now we're ready to cut our tenon stock. So we've got our rail, and I've got my thinner divider that will make our cuts. So let's head back over to the table saw and make these cuts.
So on the mortiser, Tom, what's the best way to square the chisel to the fence?
I just use a little square. I'm going to show that in a little bit, but if you want to just spin around here for a second. I'll just take my little square. I find the hollow chisels should be square, so I just use a small square against the fence. I want to do it this way so you can see. And I bring it up to the side, and this is the adjustment screw. You can turn it so that I want to see this square dead flat against the side of my mortising chisel, like that. and then I lock in the tightening nut. Now, when you're drilling across, you see like a sawtooth angle, then it's not square. So if in doubt, just try it out in a scrap piece to make sure it looks smooth along the back as you cut. Okay, that was good to talk about. All right, so let's head back over to the table saw. All right, so now I want to cut these tenons. I'm going to go for a 7/8 long tenon, and to do this, I've got my blade set a little shy of 7/8 because we're going to come back after and make the shoulder cut to the full 7/8 deep. We're going to start with the cheek cuts, the thickness or the width of the tenon. In this case, it's going to be 5/16 of an inch. So I set my blade just shy of 7/8 high. So that would be 13/16 for those of you keeping score. But yeah, right around there.
That's right with you, of course.
It doesn't matter. Close to 7/8. All right. And now I'm going to cut the tenons by holding the piece vertically and going across. So I'll make one cut and then I'll move over 5/16 plus the thickness of the blade and make my second cut. So I end up with a 5/16 thick tenon there, right? But let's come over here. We're going to mark it out. So here's my face. Get my pencil. So to lay this out, let's say I wanted to go to a flush face here. I would hold this flush and then come in and make a pencil mark right on the edge of my mortise right there. And I'm going to cut to that side of that line. And then move over the 5/16 to the other side and cut that. But so here's the setup. We know that these are the same distance, so these will be cut with the same setting. But here's the thing. On the table saw, you can cut the cheeks really nicely and accurately with a simple jig like this. This is my tenoning jig for the table saw. It's just a box of, I used Baltic birch plywood, but it fits over the fence. So this is a pretty standard style fence on a nicer cabinet saw, and they're really true to dimension, so that when you build a box over the top, it'll slide. It'll slide on there
smoothly
without squeaking.
Oh goodness!
What the heck?
Never heard that.
I think it's the grain. I can't take it. I can't take it. I'm gonna get a little wax for that.
Oh, that's great.
I think it's just the grain rubbing on the table.
Good thing we're not trying to sell those.
Have you ever heard that? I think it's under here. Something.
Never ever heard that.
It could be that little flap. Oh, while I'm under here, notice this block has been sawn away quite a lot from cutting the tenons. Now, this can be replaced. This block is just screwed on from this side. So, but rather than replace it before, you can get a lot of use out of it if you just keep replacing this front fence. Oh, it's all right. Okay, so now we're going to set this up to cut the tenon in this manner, but
We should mention before you go on that we do have a video on how to create that tenon jig in the description below.
exactly, yeah, I forgot to mention that. So yeah, to build the box and the fence, there's a video. You can just build one if you want. You know, you've probably seen those metal ones that got the turn crank. You can buy them. They work, but they can be challenging. This is sweet and intuitive because you're using your own fence that's already on there. You can quickly adjust it. And you don't actually have to clamp the piece on there. You can hold finger pressure against the fence when you make the pass. So the way this works is I'll put the face of my workpiece against the fence vertically and make my passes here where I'll make one pass for one side and then a second pass for the other side. Then once I've got the cheek cuts made, we'll remove this and lay it horizontally and make the clean shoulder cuts on both sides. Now, here's a little tip. You can use this jig with spacers. So this is my 5/16 tenon spacer. It is 5/16 thick plus the width of the saw curve, which is usually right around 1/8 of an inch with these carbide tip blades, and they're 1/8 of an inch thick. So this is a 7/16 thick tenon. I'm sorry, a 7/16 approximately thick piece of plywood. So I just sanded it, run it through the sander if you don't have the exact, or you can even skim it through a planer, which can get a little tricky. But this material will be close. And then I made a test cut. So look, we'll set it in here. Now we bring the cut up, and see that little pencil line we made? We're going to be cutting on the waist side of the pencil line there. And then I'll make my pass, then I'll remove the spacer. It's going to move over 5/16 plus the other to get to the other side, and I'll make that cut. So when you set this up, you're going to do it. It may not be that you have the perfect thickness for your tenon spacer, so you have to micro adjust a little. If it needs to be a little thicker, you just put a piece of masking tape on there. If it needs to be thinner, take it off, or you'll have to sand this piece a little more and then run it again. So masking tape is a cheap little shim and works great. So I've got this one set up where it should be all set, and I'm going to put the face against the fence, and you have to make some test cuts in order to get, you're always going to be using some test material to get to that flush surface there. Now with the twin tenon, we're going to use the same setup, except we're coming in this way because this is the way the piece is oriented in there. So we'll make one cut on this face with the spacer, one without. Then we'll be flipping it around, make one with the spacer, and then one without. And we'll end up with two tenons that should be set here. Now I did a little setup work so I wouldn't have to fuss with that. Just moving the fence, tweaking it until it felt flush here, and then did a sample version to make sure we were close here, because that needs to be set up nicely. But this method works for the twin tenon, as I said, when the horizontal rail stock is the same width, because we're referencing from both sides. So let's go ahead and make this cut.
Martin's curious, when you were discussing the first test piece, why not just turn the piece around? Not the twin tenon, but the other one.
Oh, well, because I'm offset, I'm not in the center. So you can do that method. You can just turn it around and cut the other side, but you have to have the perfect thickness material, because when you do that, you're relying on the thickness of your material to be consistent. Like I might have one piece that's slightly different and your tenon is going to fit differently. Here with this method, we're staying with the same reference surface, so we're moving it the same distance each time with our spacer jig. So we're getting consistency and accuracy on the fit. We're not relying on the thickness of the tenon. The method you may have seen for cutting tenons, another method is putting a dado head in the table saw and running it horizontally. And that way you make your shoulder cuts and the thickness of your tenon. Then you flip it over and make some more. But you have to adjust the height of the blade, and that method is dependent on your stock being uniform in thickness. And you can't always trust that. However, when you're referencing off of one face with the same spacer, you're going to get consistency with the thickness of your tenons. Okay, that's a good question. Thank you. All right, so put on my gear, and I'm going to make these cuts, and then we'll see what we got. Turn on the dust collector. Face against the fence. Okay, now we can break down the saw, and we're going to cut from the side. So we're going to make our shoulder cuts. So we need to drop the saw blade down. Let's see, we're about 1/4 inch. I can also use the piece. I'm going to drop it down. This looks centered, but it's really not. It's slightly off center. Okay, and I'm going to measure off the fence. We're going to index right off the fence for this. And I'm going to come over 7/8 of an inch to the outside of the blade here, so that I'm left with a 7/8 inch long tenon. Okay, we're going to make a nice shoulder cut there. Now, in making this cross cut, it's good to use a little miter gauge for a backer and to hold it, help you hold it flat against the fence. Also, occasionally it happens if you just run through here that tab of wood is going to get released, and once it's cut free, it's between the blade and the fence. So it can dance around in there. Usually it just gently floats out in this case, but once in a while it can twist and jam and kind of kick back. It's not like a dangerous kickback, but everything's kind of housed in here, but it will kick the blade over to the left momentarily when the piece gets in there, and it'll mar the shoulder here, and it could hit you, technically it could. So what you can do is make the cut in 2 passes, or you can nip off these with a bandsaw like this before you make the cut. You can just knock off all of like that. So now when I make this cross cut, the waist piece is too thin to get jammed in there, so it'll just come off freely. So I want to set the height of the blade to just touch the side of the tenon. So I'll make a cut and I'll just adjust it up until I see it right, and then we'll flip it over, and I think we're close enough where we can do the back with the same setup. Okay, here we go. Okay, there we have it. We've got our tenon and our twin tenon, but we've still got a little work to do because we have to step down our tenon to fit into that opening. So I can do that quickly right here by just resting the tenon on the bottom of the mortise right here, then bringing in my pencil and marking the top of the tenon. I want to step down just a little bit, give me some opening. I could hand cut this, or while I'm here right at the bandsaw, we can just set the fence up. And if you had a full table, you'd be doing this with all your rails, so it'd be quick operation here. You want me to? So I'm just going to move the fence over. Let's drop down a little bit. And just take that pencil line. And I want to make sure I don't saw up into my shoulder. Okay. Let's head back to the bench. And we'll go through this. Just want to fit this one up.
Hey, Tom, before we move on to the next thing, I've got a question. David's asking, do you use a flat top blade for this work, or will an alternate bevel blade work okay?
The alternate bevel will work. I happen to have a flat #1 grind carbide blade in there right now, but for years I went with the other. But you do have to watch it, like when you use the beveled angle, you're going to end up with a little peak of material here. So at the end, you need to make sure that you have no obstruction. Like you can see that this chisel, it's stopping right there on a tiny lip of material. So if I use my chisel as like a knife, I cut across and then I'll come in this way. See, I just removed that. By making that slice first, it'll just fall away. Well, when you use a alternating kind of bevel cut on, you're going to end up with a little triangular cut. You're familiar with that, I'm sure, if you've used those. But on this side, again, I have a tiny bit. And believe it or not, that little bit of material will make the joint bind because it is that much thicker at the bottom of the cut. So there, we've got that cleaned out. And now I'm going to cut down from the top. This I could have set up to come close to this on the bandsaw as well, but I thought I'd show you a little hand cut method. Usually I use the Japanese saw. It has very little set, and I can, let me turn it around the other way so you can see the saw. And I'm going to rest the saw just against that shoulder very gently and drag it toward me and then drop down. And I don't want to scar the shoulder, so I'm just kind of, I'm favoring the waist side, but you're going to end up with it not being perfectly clean. So see, I've got a little bump of material there, so I'll need to just come in with a chisel. I can do this on the bench by taking a mallet and see, just set the chisel right on that little proud piece and come in from both sides. Now normally I'd be sitting in front of it, but I didn't want to block your view. And just take it away like that. Just don't go all the way through, or it could blow out the other side. But you want to just clean that up. You can do it by hand too with a sharp chisel by just sweeping in like this, if it's just a little material. And you want to make sure that your chisel can sit flat so that you're going to get it fully seated when you go. So let's try it out. Here's our joint. We've got it nice and cleaned up, and I'm just Just gonna wobble it a little bit and then press it in there. And look at that, nice. If you can pull it tight like that by hand, then you can be pretty sure with a clamp it's gonna be fully seated, okay? So that was our single mortise and tenon. And we're right at the bottom. I can just slightly see see that? You can slightly see the mortise at the bottom underneath it. I'm flush on the top and just the tiniest line. It's as much the pencil line as well. But then on the other side, we've got our twin tenon. Now, you can try these. That's nice, it's already going. But these are a little long because I remember I went to a shallower depth. So after the fact, I can cut these off. Now, I've also got another issue where, see that middle section? That was not the full depth because I couldn't make my cross cut for the shoulder across the middle. So you have to clean that out and make sure it's in plane with both shoulders in order for this to seat fully. So what you do is you just take a square and a good marking knife with a flat back, and I hold the marking knife against the shoulder. So see, it's nice and tight, and then I can slide the square up to it till it stops precisely at the location I want. Now I'm gonna score, make a nice slice with the marking knife right across there. Now that slice should be in perfect plane with both shoulders. Then flip, do the same thing. Okay, and now we can chop that out. I'll just hold this with a clamp. And I need a 1/4-inch chisel, actually, might even be less than a quarter. So I've got this little thinner chisel here, and I'm gonna make this in 2 chops. I'll take away some of the material and then I'll set it into the knife line. So I'm just going about halfway down. Now I'm gonna set it right into that knife line. Let's see, there it is. And going halfway again. And then we flip and get it from the other direction. Set. You want to feel that positively seat in the knife line. What could go wrong? Okay, and then once I've got that, I want to detail and make sure everything is clean in between there. Make sure I've got no bumps of material at the base of the tenon in the same way as we did with the standard tenon. I can see I've got a little right there, and we just clean this up. Okay. Now, between these tenons here, too, you've got to make sure that that middle area, there's not a little rising bump of material in there. If there is any, it's going to keep the joint from seating. So when I was chopping down between there, you want to chop, you know, you want to chop right at a 90 or undercut it even from both sides, coming in like that. Now, these are still a little long. I'm just going to cut them off. They're 7/8 long. Now that I've got my shoulder already established, it doesn't matter how long I cut them. I've already got everything cleanly established. So I'll just cut them a little shorter here. And let's see how it fits. So we'll come over, set it in. Nice. Okay, as I press that down in, look, I'm nice and tight in the front. And you can see it's tight across the middle. And because I chiseled on the mortises right to the knife line, I should be nice and square as well. So if I squared my knife lines across and I chop, this, what's nice about this is it is kind of a self-squaring joint as well. So that gives you a good idea of how you can cut the twin tenon and the face tenon here, the standard tenon. So, any other questions at the moment?
It looks funny. That doesn't really have a purpose except this demo, but
Where am I going with this? I don't know. I'm just going to keep adding
it's like
on.
a yard
Yeah,
thing.
right. All right, so so to move on from here, let's see, I'm trying to think of, I've got several other things I want to show you. There's another way to cut the twin tenon. I'll just explain here briefly. Sometimes when you cut a twin tenon, you're cutting it into material that is not of the same dimension. Like let's say we wanted to put this tenon, this piece, we wanted to cut it with a mortise and tenon into this leg. Now this is similar to the writing desk that Joel mentioned earlier. This leg actually is the same shape as that. And for that project, we had these horizontal rails coming in with twin tenons so that we had a space in there. Rather than a rail coming in vertically like this, the design employs two horizontal rails like that. And then there's some vertical pieces. And all the joinery is twin tenon. And it's all set up in the same way, so it allows you to make it more quickly. But when you're coming into the leg and some of the other pieces, it's not the same width, so you can't just flip it around like that. So the method that we use for that is actually to use a spacer block. So let's see, let's just make a mark quickly on here. I'll show you this. See how fast we can do this. I know we had talked about stopping after an hour and a half and then having questions for a half hour, but since we've taken questions along the way, if you can decide if you still want to stop, or should we can go a little longer anyway, but.
Well, and people can put their questions in here, and I can let you know if we have some.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead and ask them along the way.
But if you want to go ahead and fill the space for now.
Yeah, and we'll feel it out when it's a good time to stop. Mm-hmm. So, let's see here. So here with this piece, I want to come off the back. If I come down, let's say it's 3 inches, I would think. I'm going to just set this. We'll cut one 3 inches down from the top. Now, here's another method. Let's say we want this rail to be down here, and we're going to have it 3 inches down from the top. So, make a little cut right here. And we're going to set it in that way. Now again, we could fumble around a little bit. Remember that we were holding it here and then knifing and getting it across. Or, like in the case of this project, we had so many of them that I took a piece of material that was the same thickness as all my dividers. So they were all like 3/4 of an inch. And I just had an extra piece. and I mounted it to a block at 90 degrees. And so then we're able to come in and set it against the workpiece with a knife. Let me do it this way, so. And set the knife in there. Okay, once I've indexed it, now I can just hold it and cleanly come across both. And there we go. We've got our marks. So everywhere we needed dividers, we could quickly and accurately mark it. So then we also would then have our mortise here, and we had a second mortise there. Now, rather than flipping it around when cutting your twin mortises, we're going to reference off the same side. So let's put a piece of chalk. This would be like the back. This is going to be our reference point here. So let's head over to the mortiser, and I'll just quickly show you the technique for cutting a twin tenon when you have uneven parts.
Yeah, Tom, do you like to sand and finish before assembly, keeping the mortise raw and clean? What's your...
It depends on the piece, like whether we would sand and finish before, before assembly. Yeah, because I prefer, and 90+% of the time, I will finish after everything's assembled. Yeah, for instance, making a chair or these tables. In order to pre-finish, you've got to tape off all the joinery, and then when you're gluing up, you're going to have squeeze out. I just find it's much easier and more in the flow of work to not try to jump ahead and finish and then come back and glue up. However, there are cases where it's really difficult to get the finish in after. So it's kind of an issue of the construction of the piece. If you had like boxes that were small and you couldn't finish inside there, then I would pre-finish that and then glue up so you don't have to worry about that inaccessible area that would be really difficult to finish. So it's a question of the project and what makes the most sense. All right, so here I wanted to show you the quick change around too of the setup. So let's say I want to go to a 1/4 inch bit. I'll just loosen the hollow chisel here, and then the drill bit is just your regular drill chuck. So I've got my key, and I'm going to loosen the drill bit, and this is going to drop right down. And there we have our bit. And we want to put in a 1/4 inch bit. So we just bring it up in, and you've got two things happening here. You've got, this is clamping the collar of the hollow chisel. So I'm going to just bring that up and seat it and just snug it. Okay. Then the other is for the drill bit, and I'm going to raise that so that I want to leave this drill bit so it leads the cut by about 1/16 of an inch. Okay, so I'm going to look at it here from the side. Got it about 1/16 of an inch leading the cut, and tighten it up in there. Okay, that's that. Snug it up, close it up, and then we want to square the chisel to the fence, as we talked about earlier. So you can see, I'll just tighten that up. I bring that in, and it's not square, so I'm going to just loosen this enough to rotate. Can you see that? It's dead flat now. So I will then snug it up again. And there we go. We're dead flat and square to the fence. Okay? So now if I come back to my joinery here, I'm going to raise this up a little. Got to get one other piece here. Now here's an added, here's the added difference I'm going to show you here. I'll use that as a riser. I just have that block in there to lift it up higher. This one, you can see it and work on it. This one I could use without, but you can see it better this way as well. So this would get clamped in there, but here's the difference. So rather than flipping it around and cutting from both sides, we can't do that because this is kind of asymmetrical and we're coming off of one side. So we're going to use a spacer. This is a 1/2 inch thick. See, I know it says right there, twin tenon mortise spacer. So this is just a couple pieces of 1/4 inch MDF that I glued up. You can also get 1/2 inch stock, whatever it is. You can make them an inch apart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up so that one cut will be made with the spacer in there. Okay, so I'm going to adjust now the depth of the cut. I'm going to loosen this, and we're going to just push our table back. Okay, and let's say I want this to be 5/16 off of the. I'm going to make this to be. I'm just sighting it to be 5/16 off. Okay, so that's my first cut. I'm going to lock it in there. So I'm going to make this cut, and then I'll remove the spacer and make my second one, okay? So let's set the depth. These are only going to be 1/2 inch long tenons. So I only need like a 9/16 depth. So this is another spacer block. This is going to go under my depth stop, and I'll lock it in. So I do that while my hollow chisel is resting on the wood. Now I take this out, and I'm going to go 9/16 in from here. So I'm going to sight this. Let's lock it into the table here. Clamp that to the fence. And slide over. Here we go. Okay, now we'll remove our spacer. All right, and see, we've got our twin tenons accurately spaced by a 1/2 inch. So now that this is done, let's head over to the table saw, and I'll show you how quickly you can cut the corresponding accurate twin tenon. So now that we're old pros at the tenoning jig, we're going to bring it up here, and we're going to bring our material up, and again, this is going to be our reference surface. So let me get my pencil. So we're going to hold flush with the reference surface again, and then we'll make a pencil line right here on that first mortise. And we want to cut to we want actually to make our cut in here. I'm sorry, we're going to cut on this side to leave our tenon here. So we're going to cut to this line. This will be the waist side of the line, okay? That's what we're going to set up to on our saw as well, okay? So let's get the blade height adjusted to, we are going to end up with a 1/2 inch, so let's just go to a little shy of that 7/16. Now, this time, we're going to use instead the 1/4" spacer, because we just cut 1/4" mortises. And this time we're going to use it in combination with our spacer that we use to set the distance between our twin tenons. So we'll use this in conjunction with the tenon thickness. So here we'll come in. Let's bring this up, and we're going to sight it to that blade hitting the waist side of our pencil line that we made there. Here's where we just simply move our fence using our tenon. There we are. We're touching the pencil line. I'm not going to bother with test cuts here. I just want to show you the process. So here, what I'm going to do is make one cut with that, and then remove my 1/4" tenon spacer and make my second cut, and then remove the twin tenon spacer, and it's going to slide over the same distance as we did on the mortiser, and we'll again make our tenon using the spacer and one without, so we'll end up with our twin tenons. Let's go ahead and knock this out and see if it fits. Okay, I'll just quickly set up to make a shoulder cut. This is not meant to be super precise, just to show you the method here. So to make 1/2" tenons, we can set our fence at 3/8, or we could measure right off. That's close enough. And then we'll drop our blade down. Again, we're making the shoulder cuts this time, again on the twin tenon. Bring in our backer, and we'll reference right off of the fence. We'll make this in 2 cuts. Here we go. Okay, let's go back to the bench. Sorry, I gotta grab my square. So we'll come in here. Again, we'll just use the shoulder as our guide. Score right across. Flip. Shoulder as our guide. Score right across. And here we can use a 1/4" chisel. I won't put this in the clamp. We're going about halfway down. Same thing. Okay, then we'll just clean out between there. I'm going to show you, after we finish this, I'm going to show you variations of the mortise and tenon joint using these same principles that we started out here with. And and also if you have any questions, this is a good time to type them in, because we'll be moving into that as well. All right, so once that's nicely cleaned out, just like we did on the last one, gotta make sure the tenon itself is not over thick. If everything, here we go. Let's check it out. So remember now, this time we did not use the flip around method, we used a spacer. So I could have used a thicker spacer and those would be further apart. It doesn't matter, as long as you use the consistent same spacer when cutting the mortises and the tenons. We'll get our reference was from the back. We can set it right there and see that fits beautifully. I didn't clean out the bottom of the mortises yet, that's why that's held off. So there you have that. Okay, again, so we'll set that back up, then bring it in and press it in. I'm flush on the back, and I've got a nice fit twin tenon using the double space, the thickness spacer. So that's a nice way to achieve it into asymmetrical or odd size pieces, referencing the same face using the spacer. All right, are there any questions right now?
Single tenon as well, right?
Well, with a single tenon, well, usually you're referencing off of the fence one time with the single tenon. So this is for the second tenon. So it only makes sense when you have twin tenons to use a spacer like that, yeah. Are there any questions at the moment? And then I want to show some. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to show you a few variations on the mortise and tenon and expansions of the concept, and you can get your interest piqued here. But here's a classic mortise and tenon for a bed rail. So this is the bed bolted mortise and tenon joint. It's not super long, it doesn't have to be. It's a lot like a timber frame construction, but it's not pegged into place, it's held into place with a bed bolt. So let me put this down here. And one of the things, I don't have it to show you here at the moment, but this is obviously the long rail of the bed. And we've got our tenon on the end here with our mortise to capture the bed bolt. Now this, when you're handling material this long, it's pretty hard to hold it up like this and run it on my nice little tenoning jig on the table saw. So this type of joint, I make actually a box to hold it, and I route from the end with a homemade jig set up to cut a tenon like this. And I tack a spacer on the end that the router has a nice guide collar that goes around. That whole setup and that approach to this bed, actually, believe it or not, it's in this month's issue of Fine Woodworking magazine. The building of this bed, and there's a blow up on making that tenon and the box that I use to create that tenon. So hopefully if you have Fine Woodworking, you can check that out. Otherwise, actually, we have this whole course is in a video course, and we have the full-size drawings and everything. In that video course as well, we go over. So if you're in the mindset of making beds, that's a great way to learn. This is a traditional method that I learned with Pug Moore down there in North Carolina. And
Or if you want a pre-made bed, we have the actual bed.
oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. But wait, there's more. No. So anyway, here's the this traditional bed bolt. It's got the square head and the built-in washer, and this feeds in through the end of the post, in through the rail, and that tapered point finds the thread really easily. So I can just drop the bolt in. There's just a little play there, and then I'll bring my mortise in. You're probably noticing this double mortise. That's because the short rails actually get glued in. With a lot of poster beds, you have the identical joinery over here because the entire bed is breaking down like a tall post bed. You would normally see that. But the reason you're seeing this is because we glue it in. And I leave that big spacer so it doesn't collide with the bolt that has to pass through this post and find the nut. Okay, so it comes in, I can see it finding the nut, and then I just give it a couple turns. It's already captured on the thread. It finds it super easily. And then you can use this fancy bed bolt wrench, or you can use a 7/16 socket head. And with the 12, I forget what that's called. One of you guys who are mechanics can. So then you just set it up to lock it in, snug it up. And I mean, look at that joint. Let me turn it on so you can see it. That is so solid and stout and tight all around that joint. It's just rock solid like a timber frame house. This is the low post, the low pencil post bed. So this would be the head post where the headboard would gets joined in here. So anyway, that's one aspect of the mortise and tenon, just a nice straight mortise and tenon. Then we have through mortise and tenons, which I didn't get to, we weren't going to include this morning, but this is achieved by simply marking out from both sides. So when we mark our mortise, we would square our lines around, and I actually come in from both sides with the mortiser. So you go a little over halfway deep on both sides. Then you're going to cut your tenon long enough to extend all the way through. And usually, if it's a craftsman style piece, they come through and are proud by about 1/8 of an inch typically. And so that could come all the way through like that. So here, then we've got these saw cuts are cut, and usually about 1/4 inch in from the end, because if you come in too far, it's going to be too much material for the wedge to spread, okay? So it's got to have some flex on it. You don't want to be so thin like 1/8, but that gives you just enough. And then I usually put I drill a hole right at the base, and that prevents it from cracking and splitting out. So when it's inserted, it goes into the mortise, and I should say that after the mortise is cut, the exit mortise is actually marked about 1/16 of an inch wider on each end, and you just chisel in at a slight angle. That allows the wedges, when driven, to spread those tabs on either end. I'm not going to drive it because then I won't be able to take it apart again as a show and tell. But when those are driven in with some glue, that piece goes over and hits the wall, and that joint is locked tight. So it could be driven together without glue because it's a mechanical fit. Here's one that is glued up and finished, the same style.
So it went through, it was over wide, and you can see the oak wedges driven into this piece of cherry. And I'm telling you, that's rock solid. But isn't there something really sweet? There's just a sense of integrity about the quality of that joint. And that was really one of the telltale signature joints of the Craftsman period. Because when they would come through like that, it was like, wow, that's an honest joint. There's no like skimpy round dowels in there that are going to come loose really easily. So this is simply using the same methods we did, but marking out and coming in from both sides and cutting the tenon longer. And you can have yourself a through tenon. I believe we did a video on that we also connected to.
There's 4 different videos linked below that reference things Thomas talked about today.
Yeah, the bed bolt joinery. Oh, that's right. That's in a. You don't need to go to Fine Woodworking to see that. We have the free video, the Shop Night Live bed bolt joinery. If you want to see that technique with that.
You also have several Craftsman projects.
Yeah, exactly. This is actually we've got a chair. This is a coffee table that we did with a. Let me see if I can put this together quickly.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't being heard there. I was just saying that we have lots of Craftsman projects. A rocking chair, the dining chair you saw earlier, dining table, and a coffee table, which Tom is explaining here.
So this is a little coffee table, and this shows you the Craftsman style. I mean, the Craftsman style is all about mortise and tenons. I don't have all the parts here, but I just want you to see how this goes together. This is white oak, which was a signature material for the Craftsman period, and it just goes together so beautifully. It gives you a great sense of durability and value. Let me see, I gotta bring this together. Get a little tap here. So this is the coffee table, one of the ends of it, and you can see we're missing the vertical staves that are just 3/4 inch squares with 1/2 inch square tenons coming up through. And then there's a through tenon for a shelf that came in actually wider and then stepped down to come through. And this is left proud, a lot like these over here. So these are not wedged, they're just fitted through the mortises. So again, these mortises are cut from both directions. But this is a great project if you really want to get into mortise and tenon joinery. Any Craftsman style project you can find will offer you a lot of experience in mortise and tenon joinery. Unlike like case pieces like chests of drawers or where you have a lot of panels coming together, typically that's going to be about dovetailing. So, but where we have rails and legs, we're about mortise and tenons.
So now, Tom, question, Martin's curious, is a gooseneck chisel unnecessary for cleaning out mortise tent bottoms?
It can be helpful. You know, it's not necessary. You can just get down there with a typical regular chisel. Having a little bend on that chisel will help you evacuate some of the residue at the bottom. But sure, you can get by without it if you need. But hey, when you have an excuse to get another tool, why not? Now,
did you just say that out loud? I don't know. Unspoken truth.
One thing I didn't mention today was the haunch. Now, a haunch mortise and tenon is when you have the tenon coming out from the material, but then you have that little stubby tenon at the end, and that's called the haunch. And it just extends the tenon out into the piece. Now, really, it's not necessary on legs as I showed you, and you can see where I cut it flush. But where it was employed quite a lot is the other common way that you would see mortise and tenons is with frames. So door frames. where you have a true mortise and tenon coming through. So if I wanted to build a door with a raised panel, I would first run a groove all around the 4 pieces to house the raised panel. So when you're running the groove with the old shooting planes, you'd run it all the way out. And what that did was it created a depth of a groove all the way out the ends. So when they came in and to create the tenon, they would then cut the tenon using the groove as a guide of the same thickness as the groove width. So here I have a 1/4 inch groove. I've got a 1/4 inch wide tenon. But when cutting the tenon, I would leave a haunch at the top to fill that groove coming out the end. And it also helps, subtly help with it not twisting. But see, then you have that filled in there, and you get a really nice finished door this way. So you would put in both halves this way, and then your door panel slides in, and you glue in the other half, and then you'd peg your tenons, and you end up with a sweet door like this. So with your haunches on the bottom. I had a hunch someone was going to ask me about this, so I had to have it ready. All right, so there you go. And then we've got this is a floating panel of pine. This was actually a door from our hanging cabinet course that we just finished. It also has a bow front version in it as well. Let me show you another version. 2 more quick examples here. We didn't get to talk about the angled tenon, but you can see here's the joinery for that craftsman style chair that I showed you right at the very beginning. So we have our side rail, and this one has the hole drilled out so you can actually see how things align. It actually does go through the tenon. So when we assemble the chair, the front is glued up first, and then let me show you this way here. So we've got our front of the chair is glued up with just our front rail. And then these are the front legs, which are 20 inches wide, and it angles back to the back section that's only 16 inches wide. Okay, so here's the chair. This has an additional piercing detail on it. That's kind of sweet. So these side rails have to go from 20 back to the 16. So you have to go 2 inches narrower over the 16-inch depth. So in order to do that, that's all laid out on a drawing first, and then we have the side rails go in to the front on both sides. And then we have our back stretchers also go in. This one got shimmed out because it was a little skinny. But check this out at the top. See this tenon right here? That tenon is turned and at an angle. So we've got this angle of the tenon is the same as the angle of the rail coming back, so that those tenons turn and go squarely into the back section. So if I bring the back section over here, you just pop this together and you'll see it. I just bring it up, and this is how the sequence when you're gluing up for the final. You glue up the whole back assembly, the front assembly is glued up, and then the side rails just fit right in. And see how the angle is set? So they come in and they seat, and you've got that same seat angle that is established from the drawing. But when you're cutting those tenons, it's the same. You're just going to lay the blade of your table saw over to this seat angle. And that's going to cut the angle of your tenon. Again, using your spacer, your tenon spacer when you're cutting it. Now, sometimes the angle is strong enough that as you lay your saw blade over, your tenon spacer needs to be slightly thickened up, because when you go to an angle, your tenons get slightly narrower. So you might need to put another piece of tape on your spacer for angled joinery, but you see how then the shoulders are cut with the same angle. So when it's a little more complicated, because when you lay it over to cut your shoulder, rather than just a 90-degree cut from both sides, you're keeping the blade at the angle it was to cut the tenons, and you're making a cut from the front, and then you're flipping to the other side of the fence to make your back cut, and you end up with a nice angular seat. But this again, this is another, chairs in general are a great exercise to work on your tenoning techniques. But I wouldn't go to a chair until I was comfortable with small tables. You know, start out with a table, small frames, get the feel for it. And one thing I didn't mention was when you're fitting the tenon, you don't want to fight it to go in, because when you put glue on there, it's going to expand a little and it's going to get a little tighter. So you can stress out in the gluing up process if they're too tight. But you don't want it to just drop in either. If you accidentally cut one too thin, all I do is take a quick little shaving with a hand plane and glue it to one surface with a little, plastic covered block. And you take that off and it's going to fit like a beautiful thing. All right.
Okay, I do have a question.
Sure.
Ross is asking, any tricks to bevel the part of the tenon that sticks through?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. Where's that? Okay, here it is. This one doesn't have any through tenons, but yeah. So just to show you this example, this piece has the tenon and it's not yet cut off. See, that's sticking through by about 1/4 inch. But see that pen line? I made that just using a spacer, an 1/8 inch spacer. And I also do it down on the bottom because this one has an angle to it. So once they're dry fit like this, the tenon, the proudness is marked like that. Then I would disassemble, and once it's disassembled, then you're going to trim to that pen line, clean it up, and while it's disassembled, I'm going to put it into my vise, and I just take a block plane. Let's do it on this end. So this is still long, and just holding it at a 45. Sorry, I should be doing this so you can see it.
Well, then your hand's in the way, so yeah, it's okay. Oh, that's great.
So you're going to go about a 45-degree angle on all 4 sides, and you'll end up with an end like that. And then I pre-sand it, burnish it, so it's all done before assembly. If you tried to do that after assembly, it would be near impossible. And you'll end up with a nice fitting joint. I'm not sure if that's the one. Yeah, there we go.
I don't know if this is a coincidence, but a gentleman named Peter Elmer is asking you to talk a little bit about gluing the joints up more.
Yeah. Wait, maybe.
I don't know. Is there
maybe he's the owner. Trying to get a little plug there? No.
Ulterior motive? I don't know.
Yeah, so let me just finish this point. So on this end, you can see that they are finished. This one's not clamped up, but they'll end up being proud by about 1/8 inch like that. And you will already have your polish kind of faceting on there. So when it's glued up, you're going to get some glue squeeze out. So just take a damp rag, and I wipe it off immediately. And you want to remove all the haze. And if you just move quickly, you'll end up with nice clean joints there. You don't want to leave that glue on there, otherwise it's going to inhibit the in the finishing process, you're going to see the light colored now. So what was the glue question again?
Just talk about gluing the joints up more. If you watch any of those episodes, the Shop Night Live episodes, you're going to see lots of gluing experiences.
Yeah, we do. Well, I always, when I'm gluing up, I will put glue on all the surfaces. To mortise and tenons, you want to make sure you get glue spread on the inside of the mortise sidewalls and also the sidewalls of the tenon. I don't worry a lot about the end grain here because when you go to plug in, that glue usually gets squeezed out and you'll see it come out anyway. So you don't really need to send glue there. And once it's clamped up, I will quickly remove the excess glue with a scrap piece of wood or a thin putty knife and then wipe it with a terry cloth rag. And I say terry cloth because it's got those little fibers that help get into the corners. So if this were a glued up joint, you can push it right in there. You want to squeeze it out. You don't want it totally soaked. And I just use those fibers, jam them into the corner to remove any haze of glue residue. And it'll come off pretty quickly. And sometimes you can wrap it in a putty knife. If you double it up, you won't come through. You don't want to scratch it with the putty knife. So you can take that edge and just push it down into the corner and go all around, and you do the same thing on the exterior here. And one thing about fitting mortises that do not have wedges like these is when I was fitting this, when I'm fitting it to this joint here, it's a long fit. There's a lot of material and sometimes it's binding in there and you'll go crazy like trying to thin up the tenon, and by the time you get done, you might find that you've made the exit point tenon small, so you're seeing a gap around there. So what I usually do is when I'm fitting these tenons, I'll fit the exit first, like this. I'll come over and say, okay, this is how it's going to be coming out. I'll make sure it fits in the first 1/4 inch or so, and it's snug. You can move it, but it's a good fit. Then I don't touch that again. I don't touch this area. Anything I have to remove or tweak is going to be here or inside the joint, so that when I actually go to assemble, I have already pre-fitted the exit, which is what you're going to see, and you end up with a really nice appearance regardless, okay? So hopefully that will help. But all these tips, anytime you build it, you're going to run into these things, and there you go. Any more questions?
Be patient with yourself, yes. Mistakes are always undoable.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I think no more questions at this point.
All right, everybody. Wow. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. That was a crash course in the most fundamental joint in woodworking, the mortise and tenon, and looked at a few variations. I wanted to show you that writing desk too, but you can check out all those on the in the course section of the website, epicwoodworking.com, and look at the construction of that. And I think you'll be able to intuitively, after what we just did this morning, see that, okay, all of those horizontal thinner rails are twin tenoned, where the other rails in some of the other parts are going to be.
You have some pretty cool videos on your Instagram of that piece as well. So if people are on Instagram and they want to go look at that, it would have been back in May or June of last year, 2021.
Right. If you want to look at that, my Instagram is Tom McLaughlin 10. So
10.
not
Yep.
Epic Woodworking. All right. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. We went a little over, but hey, we were having too much fun. I really enjoyed spending some time with your groups. I hope sometime we get to see each other face to face. And
make sure you join our mailing list. There's a link to that in the description as well. We'd love to stay in touch.
Yeah, check us out on every Thursday night. We do a live from this same location. So,
and you can watch that anytime. You don't have to watch it live. And this you will have access to as well if you want to return to it. I'm sure Joel will be making that known how to do that.
Right. Thanks again, Joel and Jean, for setting this up. Really enjoyed spending some time with you all. Look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good day.
Great to be with you all. Thank you very much.